me is a very special guest this evening, Mr. Yusuf Maitama Tuggar. He is the Foreign Minister of Nigeria. Welcome to Firstpost, sir.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
Good, a bit tired, but feeling good.
The Nigerian delegation was the first to arrive for the G20 summit. How's your experience of New Delhi in particular and India in general been so far?
It's been wonderful. We received a warm welcome. I was the first foreign minister to arrive. My president was the first president to arrive, even though we arrived separately. So it's been wonderful.
You've liked it so far?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
This year's G20 summit, there's a lot of buzz about Africa. We understand the African Union is going to be made a part of the group, and India has been pushing for it. Do you foresee any obstacles, or how optimistic are you about this happening?
Very optimistic. We welcome the idea, but we also feel that Nigeria should be included as well, being the most populous country in Africa and the largest economy. And, the theme is one world, one family, one future. We want that future to be democratic, and the family should be democratized and more inclusive. So 15% of Africans should be included. The same way that EU and other European countries are included, we feel that there's room for the AU and Nigeria at the same time.
And what sort of response has this proposal received so far?
Well, there's still talks going on. Quite a number of countries are not averse to that idea. I believe India is also one of them, because India has always been supportive of the global South and South-South cooperation and collaboration. We've been partners going back to the non-aligned movement, the struggle to free Africa from racist colonial rule. So, we're quite optimistic. We're happy that India saw it fit to invite us.
How do you see India's role here as the G20 chair? But in particular, the Prime Minister has been talking about the inclusion of Africa and the inclusion of African partners. How do you see that effort?
No, this is wonderful. It's welcome, and we're happy and lucky that India has the presidency, even though it's just for a year. But India is a very key member of the G20, and we believe with the support of countries like India and the forward outlook of Prime Minister Modi, we can get in there. And we need to be on the decision-making table of the largest economies in the world, where key decisions that affect the whole world and that affect Africa are there. We're just coming out of a pandemic. We saw what happened with the whole politics surrounding vaccines, and how some countries were shortchanged, and what some are referring to even as vaccine apartheid. So this is why it's very key for Nigeria, which is expected to become the third largest country in the world with a population of 400 million, to be part of the G20.
You mentioned some very important issues, and post the pandemic and then the war in Ukraine, we've seen this East-West divide sort of widen. And this is a very important platform where leaders like you and others who represent the global South can make their voice heard and raise the issues that really matter to the people. Having said that, there is a feeling that the war in Ukraine and the politics surrounding it may overshadow all the conversations over the next few days. Is that a fear that you share?
I don't share that, because countries like India, for instance, India is the largest country on the planet. Nigeria is the largest country on the African continent. So even though we're not members, we're invitees, we're attending, and I think there's more to discuss than just Ukraine. Yes, it's important to discuss Ukraine. Yes, it's important, to talk about how to stop conflicts. The whole field of international relations was founded on the effort to try and stop wars, stop conflicts. But there's a whole lot more to discuss beyond Ukraine.
Do you think the absence of some prominent names also impacts the kind of conversations that will happen? The United States, for instance, has called Beijing a spoiler. That's the word they used.
Yes, well, I mean, these are, like I said, the theme is one world, one family, one future. So even within families, siblings quarrel, they fight, and I'm sure some of these issues will be resolved. And this is perhaps one time that not all members of the family will be in attendance, but the next presidency moves to Brazil. Maybe by then, some of these issues would have been resolved, or there's common ground to meet all together, and hopefully for Nigeria to be part of such future meetings.
Do you believe there is consensus on the agenda?
I believe there are certain areas that still need to be straightened out, but by and large, I think there's a general consensus, because India gets along with a lot of, with most of the countries, they're holding the presidency, so I think, they're good at canvassing support and, consensus.
There are a lot of commonalities between India and some of the African powers. For instance, some of us call India a bridging power. We talk to both camps, as it were, in international politics, and we're trying to find convergences where there are very many differences. Similarly, for many African players who refuse to take a side, especially in the war, do you think the inclusion of African powers and the African Union is going to mitigate some of these divisions and gaps?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. That is the democratization of these decision-making groups. We can also talk about the United Nations Security Council. It's time for reform, time for countries like India and Nigeria to belong, to be permanent members. And, this othering, really has to stop. It's not you're either with me or you're against me. There's common ground. India, for instance, belongs to the BRICS group. It also belongs to G20, for instance. So I think there's enough room, to belong to several groups and and work together.
What about the India-Nigeria bilateral partnership? How much do you see that taking a part of the conversations that you're going to have? What sort of developments and forward movement do you foresee?
There is so much that can be done. Nigeria is on a very similar trajectory as India in terms of population growth, in terms of the growth of the economy. We're very close trade partners. We export, we're an hydrocarbon exporting country, and a lot of it comes to India. We're both concerned about climate change, of course, so there's going to be an energy transition. We consider gas and energy transition fuel a significant one, because we want to industrialize, expand our manufacturing capacity and create jobs, as part of President Tinubu's 8-point agenda. Beyond that, in terms of business process operations, that call centers and stuff like that, that India is a leader. IT, you had the digital India. There's so much that we can learn from. And then in terms of fintech, we're also quite advanced compared to some countries, even developed countries. If you look at payment platform, we have the Nigeria Interbank Settlement System, which allows for real-time payments to be settled, that is owned collectively by the Central Bank of Nigeria and the banks that exist in Nigeria. So that is quite advanced, because a lot of more developed countries are still slow when it comes to payment systems. So we're quite advanced, and it is fueling that growth. We have a lot of young people. It's a youthful population, and that's fueling a lot of growth in terms of information technology, IT, and startups. So, we will collaborate with India for that growth. While we were here, there were pledges for investment, upwards of $14 billion.
India?
Yeah, from India. Private sector. The governments, of course, are there to support, create the environment for businesses to thrive. So we're very optimistic.
Yes, and fintech you mentioned is a focus area. Have you had the chance to see how UPI works? That's been one of the success stories of India, the payment platform.
I have read about it, but I haven't quite experienced it. Unfortunately, the time is short, but I know this is not going to be the last time I'm in India. It's only the first, and I'll learn more.
Let's hope so. Let's talk about the security challenges in Africa. You know, in the last few months, we've seen two coups in Niger and Gabon, and since 2028, military takeovers. When countries like Nigeria chart their growth story, how much of this security challenge impacts what you're trying to do?
Well, you see, Nigeria is somewhat different when it comes to some of these challenges, even though it is our neighborhood, if you will. But we've had constitutional government, democratic government since 1999. We've had 7 successive elections every 4 years. Our system has been tested over and again. We have had transitions between presidents. We've had transitions between political parties. The system was even tested further when, unfortunately, we lost a president in office. His vice president took over the reins of leadership. He contested an election, won, contested another election, lost. So we have a deliberative democratic system that rests on separation of powers and checks and balances. It's quite robust, and it cascades all the way down because we have, sub-state democratic system as well with 36 states, each one with its legislature, and it goes down to local government.
Sure, but in the region, in the neighborhood, what is your assessment of the security situation?
It is rather precarious. I think it's one that requires a concerted effort to reinforce institutions of democracy. The world needs to pay more attention to it. Part of the problem is, of course, the insurgencies and terrorist organizations that have been operating there, since the advent of jihadist terrorist groups, in the Sahel. We had, of course, the collapse of government and an anarchical situation in Libya. The proliferation of small arms, light weapons, in fact, even heavy weapons, in the region. So that has affected all of that. And some of the strategies that were applied, regrettably, did not work. So we're suffering the fallout of that failure, But let's leave the past. Let us look to the future. Nigeria has a very good track record at peace building. Not just peacekeeping, but peace building also. We led ECOMOG, along with the rest of the world, to settle Sierra Leone, to settle Liberia, when there was a sit-tight president after an election in Gambia not long ago. Nigeria led the way to make sure there was a smooth transition of power. So, there's a feel-good factor.
Your country also leads ECOWAS, and when the coup in Niger happened, there was a deadline that was set that the president should be reinstated, else there will be military intervention. That deadline has long passed, and we've seen that there have been deliberations. Is military intervention still an option on the table?
Absolutely, it's still on the table. It's not the only option, it's not the first option, but it is there, and it is, there to reinforce, the need to hand over the reins of leadership to the democratically elected leader of Niger. And it hasn't stopped diplomatic efforts. They're ongoing. There's so many channels that are being used, and we are hopeful that they will succeed, and we won't have to revert to a military option. And military option doesn't mean war with Niger. Nigeria and the people of Niger are one and the same. We share the same culture, same traditions, same history. Prior to colonialism, some of these borders did not exist. So there's no way, we're going to turn on the people of Niger. But the true situation is that The elected president, Bazoum, is held hostage by the leader of the presidential guards. And, we hope that the situation can be resolved amicably.
You mentioned colonialism. A shadow of that is evident in what's happening today. We see sound bites coming out of Niger and Gabon, and there's a very strong anti-French sentiment, especially in Niger. Do you think that legitimizes what the coup leaders are trying to do at some level? Do you think that there is public sympathy for these leaders and against the democratically elected president?
Yeah, regrettably, the coup leaders have played a very smart game. They've appealed to public opinion, whipping up sentiment about colonialism, about the metropole, if you will. But the reality is that countries like Nigeria, that stood at the forefront of the fight against colonialism, against the liberation of African countries. We were at the forefront. The term back then, when we were growing up, was Nigeria and the frontline states. People thought that Nigeria was right next to South Africa or Zimbabwe, So we were there, we did everything. We nationalized so many foreign business interests just to actualize the liberation of South Africa, of Zimbabwe, of Mozambique, of Angola. So, we have a clean track record. So, it would just be, it's laughable to accuse a country like Nigeria of, aligning with some neo-colonial position or some foreign interests. That is not the case. The truth is that there was an election in Niger, there was a democratically elected leader, and he's being held hostage.
If you look at the world right now, a lot of things that we discussed, you mentioned vaccine apartheid, we talked about war, there is food insecurity with food grains being held in some places, climate change playing a role there. There were fears of recession. There's so much that's happening that directly impacts people. And you're present here at a forum where we are saying for the next few days, the world is going to be running out of the Indian national capital. All the top leaders are here. What is your message to the G20 president and to all the leaders who are going to be deliberating on all these issues?
We support the concept of one world, one family, one future. It needs to be democratic. It needs to be fair. It needs to be equitable.
Very well said. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.